Welcome to We Are Human Leaders. When you're here with us, you're part of the global tribe driving change. Each conversation is an invitation to grow, to question, and to co-create a future where people, business, and society flourish together. And we, Alexis and Sally, are here to guide you on this journey, connecting you to big ideas, bold conversations, and brave questions that will help you live and learn more human every day. Today's guest, we have Mark C. Crowley, who's a pioneering leader and best-selling author of the new book, The Power of Employee Wellbeing, Move Beyond Engagement to Build Flourishing Teams. Sal, I'd love to hear from you. What was your biggest takeaway from today's conversation?
I think, Lex, it was just really the validation of this understanding that well-being is not a perk or something that we sort of reward people with at the end of the day. It's really the driver of organizational flourishing. And I think really understanding that is so helpful. And Mark sort of sheds light on a bunch of research and examples of making that happen. I think it's also pretty practical. So a lot of nodding from my side. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely, Sal. I think just that reminder that if our people are doing well and feeling at their best, that's when our organizations can truly flourish. So it's not about yoga classes and fruit bowls. It's truly about creating workplace culture and systems that really underpin employee well-being first and foremost. And Mark did a fantastic job of diving into the practicalities of that as well.
Absolutely. And I think also as, author of Leading from the Heart, there's a lot of very human,
Yeah.
people-centered wisdom that he shares with us too. So without further ado, let's dive in. Thanks so much for being with us today, Mark. Welcome to We Are Human Leaders. We're really excited to have this conversation with you. We're going to start with engagement, which is a word that has been bouncing around in organizations for more than 20 years now and has really been a key metric that HR in particular has used. What is it about engagement that means that it's really failed to shift the needle?
So the big picture direct answer is it hasn't gotten better in all those 20 years. That's the big takeaway. So you look at that and you say, well, wait a minute. Like we've been talking about this for a long time and it's been a big HR initiative and engagement's important, right? We're all on board. But the fact of the matter is that we didn't take it seriously. And so I associate that with starting with Wall Street. Wall Street has never thought that it was important. So they didn't go to CEOs and say, you better make sure you have high engagement. So CEOs didn't make it important. So what we did was we surveyed people once a year. And then after like 10 years, people said, well, once a year probably isn't enough. So we should do twice. And even twice a year, by the time the feedback got to managers, it was late. People are looking at it and they go, that person's upset about something happened 6 months ago. Like, that's not important to me. And then there was no accountability, right? So when the results came out, if people were unhappy or even specifically saying, I work for a really bad toxic manager, please help me, there was never anybody, like particularly in HR or in senior management or anywhere, saying, let's say that I was the manager that the survey revealed was toxic. So somebody should come to me and say, hey, Mark, you're getting great results just like pretty much everybody, but people hate you. Like they don't want to work for you and you need to fix that. And we've never done that. So what happens is that people pour their hearts out into the surveys. The surveys get out to the managers. No one's ever accountable. Managers never do anything with it. And guess what happens? You've actually lowered engagement because people are actually angry now that you took them through this process and you did nothing with it. So there are more reasons, but I think that pretty much sizes it up. We never took it seriously. It hasn't gotten any better. We've tried for 20 years. It's time to move on.
Amazing. I think it's such a, for a lot of people listening, this is going to be a like heads nodding moment because it is something that, to this day continues to be referred to as this kind of, we need to drive engagement. Given that it really, just really hasn't shifted things, it really is important that we're asking, well, what will? And your work does an incredible job of really looking at that question. So can you share with us what really does make the difference?
Well, one thing that you said that's interesting, because I have found there is a lot of head nodding. There's a lot of good for you, man, because I've been thinking this for a long time myself, right? But there's also people that are defending it in the HR space. I found like, oh no, we take it really seriously in our company, and we're doing a great job. And I can only say, look into your own heart on that, because if you really truly have great numbers, they're not affecting the aggregate. Right. So we're not even seeing like a slight increase. So if you've got some companies that just went out and killed it and voted tons of energy, and everybody takes it seriously, top to bottom of the organization, you would think those numbers would improve the results. And they haven't gotten any better globally either. So it's not just in the United States, it's everywhere. No one ever really made this happen. No one ever held anyone accountable for it. And and we'll get to this, I hope, but surveying people twice a year is stupid, because by the time you get to it, like, everything's out of date and nothing's current, and you can't adjust to it. All you can do is go, well, I guess that wasn't very good. What do we do now? Right. So obviously, my book, coincidentally, is called The Power of Employee Wellbeing for a reason. Right. So I'm arguing that not only is it time to ditch engagement because it hasn't worked, we haven't made it sincere, but it's also a complicated process. Right. So we asked 12 questions. Let's just assume that we asked the Gallup 12 questions. One of the engagement questions is, do you have the proper equipment to do your job? And another question is, do you have a best friend at work? So now you get the survey back and you see your engagement is low. What do you do? Do you go and get somebody a new computer, or do you help them meet people in the company? Right. I mean, it's too fragmented. So we'll dig into this. The big picture here is that there is research, remarkable research, which shows that simply asking people how they feel on any issue, simply asking them how they feel about work, is a great, great driver, perhaps the greatest driver of employee performance. How people feel, which, by the way, is the whole premise of my first book, Lead from the Heart, which is, we're not rational beings. Everything we do is influenced by feelings and emotions, right? So if we, A, consider that as being factual about employees, and B, if we survey people more regularly through pulse surveys and ask people, at the end of this week, how did you feel? On a scale of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1 being awful, 5 being great, or bright green being very happy to bright red being very unhappy or angry, right? So everything in between. And what they've been able to show, this research from Oxford was able to show this, there's a direct relationship week to week in terms of the key metrics, the key performance metrics in how people feel. So if you do a pulse survey, and you find out that people are unhappy, and you find out why they're unhappy, then management can get together and go, what can we do? Like, how can we pivot? What can we do to make this better? Now, there's always going to be times where work
Mhm.
is sucky, right? It's just challenging, but there's always things that you do to make people feel better about it, right? And so the technology is so great now. I mean, it's sort of absurd that we do 2 surveys a year in engagement, and then it takes a month or 2 before the results get out, when you can do a poll survey today. And the results of it are sitting on everybody's desk all the way up to the CEO at the end of the day. And you can even use AI to sort of say, how do we make sense of this feedback, and what can we do? So immediately managers
Mm.
can bring their teams together and say, this is what we heard. This is what we can fix. This is what we can't fix, but why? And so people go, wait, you're actually listening to us. You're actually responding to us, and you're actually making some things better. Like, this is just infinitely better than the system that we've been using for engagement.
So, Mark, moving beyond engagement then, and something obviously which is the primary topic of your new book, which is employee well-being. Now, well-being is another word we hear really bandied around in this space right now as well. A lot of leaders, a lot of HR leaders know it's something we should be focusing on, but I don't think many people are doing it well and getting it right. So can you help us unpack this term a little bit more? What is the business case for employee well-being, and what is the threat of having poor employee well-being in the workplace? Can you help us understand this a bit more?
I saw a statistic, probably no one's ever asked me this question before, so this is cool. But it was like about 18 months ago, where they said
Mhm.
that So visualize a graph of employee healthcare costs for a company. All right. So
Mm-hmm.
you kind of assume, we keep seeing its statistics show the costs are going higher and higher, right? It's just higher to get health, particularly in America. But what they were able to show is that the costs for companies for mental health care were on the verge of exceeding physical health care. And
Mm-hmm.
so in the past, we've had employee help programs, and it's like, hey, you can have 3 conversations with someone who will listen to you. And that's about it. And that's all we've ever given people. But we are seeing, particularly post COVID, a major spike in mental health. Well, people are needing that support. And so they're going to doctors and psychologists and therapists and so forth. Well, those costs are becoming rather significant. So I think what happened is that companies looked at that and said, we got to do something. So just like they did, and I'm not being cynical, I'm being very honest and direct. What they did with engagement was superficial. Otherwise, the results would have gone up after 20 years. They're flat. 20 years, you could have done something to get those numbers up, and you didn't. So I kind of have to grade that as an F. Well, if you look at well-being, if you look at the mental health, what people did was they said, well, we got to do something. So what did they do? They gave people yoga classes. They gave them headspace, meditation apps. It was all very superficial, right? Like, so we're going to create a toxic workplace or an uncomfortable workplace for you, and we're going to work you to death. But at the end of the day, guess what? You get to go to yoga class and have a free meditation app. And that isn't going to solve
Yeah.
it. And by the way, that's wellness. That's not well-being. So the difference between wellness and well-being is really comprehensively, how do you assess your life? How do you feel? And because we
Mm,
spend so much time at work, it really has so much to do with your day-to-day work experience. Do I have a caring
mm,
boss? Do I have opportunities to grow? Are people actually coaching me, teaching me, developing me? Could I grow in this company and have more responsibility in the event that I want that, right? Am I appreciated? Am I valued for who I am? Do I have a feeling of belonging here? Like, do I feel like the people that are on my team care about me? Does my boss care about me? All of that is comprehensively well-being. So the big picture here, and this is why, Alexis, I'm very happy you asked the question, is because what we're really getting here at is managerial responsibility, like how we lead people, how we manage people, how we treat them day to day is really the greatest driver of how people assess their well-being. Now, companies have
mm.
cultures and all that kind of stuff, but it's really how a manager impacts people. So I think
Yeah.
that when we focus on well-being, you're actually going to force managers to improve because you're assessing them more regularly, you're getting the results out, and you're sharing them so that you can see your results and peer results. And if you're in the red all the time, somebody's going to come and grab you by the ear and they're going to go, you're not going to be able to manage people here much longer if you don't improve that. So now all of a sudden we've created an environment where everybody has a really good manager. Like, I think, if that's what the impact of my book is, like, I've done my work, it's like, that's the greatest thing ever, is to know that people don't go to work going, God, I hate to go work for that guy or that woman or that
Yeah.
person.
And we've all had that experience, I think, Mark. I think everyone's had an organization they've worked in where they've had to drag their knuckles to work every day. And there's so there's so many things that I like about what you just said. The first one, and something we speak a lot about at Human Leaders, is the personal accountability piece, both for yourself and in leadership. I think, when we talk about culture, what we're really talking about is the accumulation of small behaviors every single day that add up to create, the bigger vibe, if you will, of an entire organization. And we know comprehensively from research that leaders have the most direct impact on their direct employees and their impact and experience of work. So I love that you went there and really invite leaders in to take some accountability for the impact they have on others, both positively and obviously negatively. I think we're so often fixed on leadership being the problem, but it's an invitation to assess and reevaluate and change how we work. And the other thing that I find really powerful about what you just said, and in a world that feels like it's turning faster and faster every day, I think many of us feel like we just can't keep up. We can't keep ourselves feeling healthy. We can't feel like we're on top of our career and meditating and exercising and eating organically and doing all of this stuff. And it's not always our fault. And I appreciate that you mentioned this idea that work and the systemic way that work is headed and has been headed for the last 50 years is actually a major contributor to our subjective well-being. And that is, if we are doing 60 and 70-hour weeks with ungodly amount of pressure on us, telling us to meditate for 30 minutes at the end of the day is just a farce. So thank you so much for illuminating that, because I do think that, even for folks like Sally and I who work in this space, sometimes we feel like we're on the hamster wheel of well-being as well. And you don't know how to get off it sometimes. So I think it's really important to point out those two things, that there is such a big systemic piece here that is making people feel like they can't keep up. But in fact, it's actually not always their fault, and largely not.
I mean, it's really interesting you should say this, because as I'm listening to you, I'm where I was thinking is that people listening to this who are managers, it's very easy for them to go, I don't have time to be taking care of other people's well-being. All I need is them to get their work done. Like that's it. Like that's their mindset, right? It's like,
Yeah.
don't be imposing this well-being thing on me. They're lucky to get the Headspace app. You know what I mean? It's like that there
Yeah.
is that kind of attitude. And so what I would say is that when you help somebody else's well-being, you're actually helping your own. You're seeing people sort of thrive and rebound and recover. And so, but at the end of the day, this is really the premise of my first book, which is that if you really truly care about people, their growth, their development, their well-being, people will reciprocate. People instinctively want to reward you for taking care of them that way, right? For making work not awful, and not just awful, but something where people go, I'm looking forward to going because I'm getting something big out of this, right? So it's in our leaders' best interest to do this. And if they go, I don't have time for it, I'm saying prioritize it because the rewards are just too great.
Absolutely agreed there, Mark. And I think also this understanding that well-being is not some sort of reward after someone's been exploited and really given their all, and then they're given, a nice little pat on the head and, here's a yoga class. But really understanding that well-being is this precursor to great work. So it's really seeing it rather than a sort of a reactive response from organizations as a kind of, reward as such, but seeing that when people are well, and exactly what you're illuminating, that they'll lean in, they'll do better work, and when they feel cared for as well, then that sort of creates, I think, a cycle of a healthier culture, healthier individuals as well. But I think it's really important that we sort of shift from this idea of well-being as a nice to have after the fact, um, to something that's actually a precursor to great work and to great workplaces.
100%. And I'm laughing because you're implying that well-being is not a perk. Like, it's like you're lucky to have it, It's like, no, like this is what sets people up for optimal performance. Like, so your
Exactly.
podcast is called Human, right? Um if we're talking about human beings, what we're saying is that by supporting their well-being, you're going to get greater performance out of them. And isn't that your job as a leader, to get performance out of people? So I'm giving you the formula. The formula just happens to be very different than anything we've ever thought it was, right? So we can continue to go, well, whatever, I'm not going to be concerned about it. But the managers that embrace this, that say, okay, oh, I actually sounded like an Australian right there. I'm going, I'm going to embrace this and I'm going to try
Yeah.
it. You're going to see. I mean, I've managed this way my entire life without ever really associating it with well-being. I've
Yeah.
always cared about people. I've always loved the people that work for me. I've always grown and developed them, and I always had phenomenal results. So I've spent a lot of time looking for science to validate what I already knew to be true, not the other way around. I didn't go, oh, wow, that's a surprise. I went looking for
Mm.
validation for this is the way to go. And so it's as Marshall Goldsmith, who wrote the foreword for the book, wrote, he goes, what he's saying, me, is He's asking you to manage in a very different way because it's a far more effective way of leading people and getting people's performance. And like, that's it. That's really what we're talking.
Now, Mark, I'd love to dive into this in a more practical sense because, again, I think well-being is a word a lot of leaders know, a lot of HR leaders know, but we're still not getting right. Something that you talk about in your book, and the first tip that you give leaders is to know thyself. And interestingly, we know from the research that 95% of us think we know thyself. But when it comes to self-awareness, only 10, maybe 15% of us actually have a pretty good, barometer on our self-awareness. So can you give us some tips? Where do we start with this?
So, I mean, really the big picture here is that if you don't know yourself, you can't manage other people. You've got to
Mm.
have a deep understanding of who you are. And what I mean by that is like what motivates you, what influenced you, where did your belief systems come from? And I had a friend of mine who's sort of like a super spiritual, someone who like almost doesn't come from this planet. She said to me, she goes, have you ever noticed that most people are operating out of their childhood selves? And it was like, oh my God, like I've managed people for decades. And you have situations where people will come in and they will react to something that you did. And you're like, I don't understand this reaction. Like this doesn't make any sense to me. And what she was implying to me is, so you can be upset with somebody and you go home, I'm really mad at Larry for what he said to me. And without realizing that what Larry said to you is what your brother said to you 20 years ago that made you mad. And Larry's just triggering this memory, right? And so in the book, I start with this, know thyself. It's, by the way, it's like my number one hashtag on Twitter for the last 12 years, because managers that understand what their motivations are will be able to express those motivations and let people understand why they operate the way they do, how they operate, how they got where they got to, right? So I'll tell you maybe an illustration. The big part of this is we have blind spots. So like you said, Alexis, we all sort of pride ourselves like, I don't need this lesson. I know myself really well. And there's no evidence that most people know themselves well at all. So I had been given a very, very big promotion into a role that I had no right doing, except that I was perceived to be a talented leader. In other words, I had no background in the business whatsoever. And the people that were working for me kind of looked like, why is he being given this when he doesn't have the technical knowledge that like takes years to develop? And again, the company said, guy knows how to manage people. That's what we need. So I honestly could see that I was influencing people dramatically. Like people were like, oh, now I know why they picked you. Like, this is cool. Like, I like working for you and you're doing things that I've wanted you to do. So I'm doing this. I'm feeling very good about myself about a year into the job. And we had this exercise, and I write about this in the book because I think it's something that everyone should do, where we had an HR business partner come in and she handed out index cards, and she's, like 20 of us in the room, and all people that I work with, people work for me, work with, and my boss. And the idea was write two things about every person in the room that you think it makes them exceptional. So you get to hear 40 pieces or 38 pieces of really great feedback. Mark's wonderful, Mark's great, Mark's wonderful, Mark's great, Mark's wonderful. And I'm like, this is great, like this is wonderful. But it was also like really validating, right? Like I thought I was doing a great job. And by the way, I was, with one exception. Then she came back and she said, okay, one more card for everyone. This one is, if there's one thing you think they could do better, if they knew what it was, what would you tell them? And so she starts reading the cards, and routinely people are like, at times Mark can be very sarcastic and it hurts us. And he's limiting his effectiveness as a leader. And I was like, I had no idea. I mean, I absolutely had no, and it hurt me because I've always wanted people to feel good around me. Well, people started telling me, you did it this time and this is how it hurt me. And I immediately realized my father was a very sarcastic, hurtful person, and I had picked it up without realizing it. So had we not done that exercise, I don't think I ever would have realize that I had this great limitation. So this is the importance of know thyself.
I love how you've explained that, Mark, in this kind of almost for me, this kind of multifaceted process, because in part it's about knowing thyself, as in doing the work in ourselves to really understand who we are. This is something that I only did after I went through a really sort of catastrophic burnout as a corporate finance lawyer, and I collapsed at an airport. And it was only in my early 30s that I, for the first time, started to do that investigative work of who I am, what are my core values, what are my drivers, how do I want my life to look and feel, this kind of really explicit exploration of who I am as a unique individual only occurred at that point. Um, and I think it's also, so there's that sort of, us driving that process, but it's also so important to get that feedback from those with whom we work and who are experiencing us and our leadership, because it's that feedback that you got, no doubt, really shifted your ability to rein in the sarcasm and to elevate your leadership sort of even to a different level altogether. And I think it's that sort of being able to uh, drive a lot of that insight and exploration through ourselves, but also then opening up to others, taking on feedback, learning and continuing that growth as we evolve as leaders. And I think it's it's not a one and done, right? It's something that we can continue to do.
It's not a one and done. And, it's also painful. So this was sort of imposed on me. It's like, hey, we're having a meeting tomorrow and HR is going to be there, and they don't tell you. And then you come in and you learn and then you just experience it. And so for me, I spent a lot of time apologizing and actually explaining how I learned it and why I did it and why I don't do it anymore. And I kind of cleaned that behavior. But, you were saying, Sally, that asking people for feedback. Well, the reason that this doesn't happen very often is because we don't want to hear bad news. Like we just simply don't, right? And the other thing is that people don't want to give it to us. So if you work for me, Sally, and I say, Sally, do me a favor, and I'm trying to be a better leader, and I would really appreciate it if you could tell me two things you think I do really well. So you work for me and you're like, okay, you're the greatest, Mark. You're like, you are a god. Like you are fantastic. I love working for you. I love working for you. I love working for you. I was like, okay, anything else? Nope. You're wonderful. You're incredible. You're the best ever boss I've ever had. So I go, all right. So now do me a favor. Like I said, I'm trying to become a better manager. Tell me one thing that you think I can do better. So the person goes, you would go, no, I told you you're a god. You're wonderful. You're the greatest ever. No, I got nothing. I got
No
nothing.
notes.
Nothing, right? And so our instinct is to go, okay, great. Thank you. But that's misses the whole plot, because that person, you in this scenario, doesn't want to hurt my feelings, but you got something to say. So I say, Sally, you gave me two great pieces. Actually, you told me I was unbelievable and wonderful. So you gave me more than I ever could have imagined. I'm sure you have just one thing you think I could do better. And then the dagger comes out. Yeah, I do. You never do this, or you say this, or I never got this. And like, you like hurt, like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. Like, and particularly if you're doing it with a bunch of people, nobody wants that experience. Nobody wants to feel that. Right. But if you don't, you won't grow. And if you do, it's like transcendence. So, I've done it so many times, and I always, kiddingly say, take a shot of whiskey before you ask the question, because you're going to get something that's going to hurt you, but it's worth it. And they're so grateful because they got it off they got it out of their mind. It's been something they've been aware of for a long time. So do you want to just continue to pretend like they don't see your weaknesses, or learn what the weaknesses are from their point of view and get?
It's such an important point, Mark. And I think so often as leaders, we don't want to lean into the uncomfortability of illuminating some of those downsides of us. And certainly our ego is very resistant to that. And I had a similar experience to you in one of my first leadership positions at Patagonia when I was living in Canada, where I got some really startling feedback when people told me that I was intimidating. And I was baffled because I really thought I'd created this space where people could come to me and raise things. But I didn't realize that there was sort of this incongruence between what I said and just how I delivered the message. And so just that tiny tidbit of feedback, while at the time I was really quite rattled by it, and it took some time for me to reconcile how I was being received versus how I felt myself to be. But it's drastically changed my ability to show up in a way that does align internally with how I want to be. And I think it's the greatest gift because I want to be received as a warm and kind and caring leader. So if people hadn't told me that, I would have spent, the next 20, 30 years thinking I was being a warm, kind and caring leader when in actuality I was being intimidating.
Yep. And they're dodging you because of it, right? Like,
Totally.
can I
Yeah.
go in and ask Alexa a question? Eh, probably not. I'm going to save that one, right? So
Yeah.
you lose that intimacy, you lose that
Yeah.
trust. So yeah,
Totally.
thank those people. They're, be grateful to the people that give you that feedback because
Yeah.
they're transforming you, if you want to be.
Your second tip, Mark, in the book, and it's really such a beautiful exploration and very sort of practical exploration for leaders of how to sort of build these capabilities that help us really, create an environment of well-being. Second tip I love, it's to drop a pin, but not on a Google map. Can you tell us what you mean by dropping a pin?
Well, what I'm really talking about is this idea that knowing thyself has to be a lot deeper than just the exercise that we just talked about, right?
Yeah.
And asking people and really assessing that you have to kind of you have to have an understanding of kind of what you were saying, Sally, in the sense that I've just crashed and burned, right? And now I'm like, okay, I need to recover and I have to start all over. I have to go, who am I? What's important to me? What are my values? What do I stand for? How do I want people to see me? And you did that exercise after crashing and burning, which is like what most people do. And what I'm saying is do it before you crash and burn.
Yep.
Right? Right? Do it before you crash and burn. But more importantly, it's when you develop your values, when you identify what those values are, you can create a credo, which credo means I believe. And so I had a gentleman on my podcast a few years ago named Eric Potterat, and he created I don't know if you're familiar with the Navy SEALs, but they're like the most elite, Navy soldiers and in the water and diving out of planes. But the training that they get is brutal and most of the people fail, they fail like horribly. And so the people that make it through are super studs, super, super successful people. And what he's imposed upon them was that they need to know what their values are. So he said, put it together in 10 words. And you can, like you said, Alexis, you were saying earlier, like it's an ongoing process, but it's like sit down and start thinking about who am I? What do I stand for? Because he said that once you've defined your credo, once you've defined what your values are, you don't have to make tough decisions because the decision is already made for you. And I absolutely love that. But the other thing is that when you have a credo and you share that with the people that work for you and they know what's important to you, you're not going to hire anybody that's not aligned to those values, right? Why would you hire somebody that's misaligned to what you believe in? You wouldn't. So you want to make sure that people on your team feel similarly, not necessarily identically, but you're going to make all of your behaviors and decisions and basically your way of life driven by this list of your 10 values. And I just think if people could really understand what they stand for, then not only will people understand who they are, but it just enables you to operate in the world in the clearest possible way. There's just, if you can be the embodiment of those 10 words, then people will be able to relate to you on those 10 words. Whereas most of the time we're just guessing. Where does he or she stand on this? What would she think? What would he think? How would he act?
Yep.
So if you've defined this, people can operate without ever having to come to you. They already know. So they can make decisions independently. They can make decisions in your best interest because you've made yourself that clear.
That's such a powerful note, Mark. And I think, you know, as someone who's been both an employee and a leader, what I also like about that is it creates a level of consistency that we can expect from one another as well. And I think people like to have that uncertainty reduced. You know, how will my leader react? What are they going to feel about this? But if we know the kind of person that we are working for, then it reduces that uncertainty, as you've mentioned, which I think is super powerful. Now, the next thing you talk about, Mark, is this idea of loosening your grip as a leader. And you've mentioned in the book that this is actually a really powerful piece of the employee wellbeing part of it as well. So help us understand, what do you mean by loosening your grip? And in a practical sense, how might leaders go about doing that?
Particularly for first-time leaders, people that are getting promoting into managers, we sort of have this belief system that my job is to find everything that's wrong and fix it, as opposed to identifying the things that are going well and reinforce it, right? But we also think that if I'm not in control here, then what am I good for? Like, you know what I mean? It's like allowing people freedom to do their work is the antithesis of why I'm a manager, right? It's like, well, what influence did you have on those people when they were working independently? Well, nothing. Well, then what do we need you for? Like, that's the mentality. And so
Mm,
there's an interesting study that I read about, about at least a decade ago, and it's called the Whitehall study. And Whitehall in Great Britain is the house of all their government. And really the only difference between people is the level that they're at. So the typical British government, you have levels, and that's where your pay grade is, right? And so what they was able to do, his name is Sir Michael Marmot. He was knighted for this study, and it's over 40 years, and he's still doing it. He's still alive. I think he's in his mid 80s. And basically what he was able to prove was the opposite of what we might assume. So if you think about all the government workers, the senior people, at the very top, and all the responsibility that they have for managing all the people at the bottom, and all the stress that comes with that, that the people who would have the most stress in their life, and as evidenced by heart issues, strokes, heart attacks, premature death, right? All those kinds of things. What they found was it wasn't the people at the top, it was the people at the bottom. And the reason is that those people had no control. So all three of us, we get to decide when we go to work in the morning, what time we take a break, right? When we go to the bathroom, when we get lunch, right? How long we take for lunch. I mean, we have all that discretion because we're all like independent and we get to choose, right? So do the people at the top of the hierarchy. The people at the bottom, you need to be here by 8 o'clock, and at 8:15, this needs to be done. At 8:45, this needs to be done. You need to check in by 9. It's don't take a break. You're not worthy of a break until 10:15. So if you got to go to the bathroom, you got to hold it. I mean, all that kind of stuff, right? So it may not be quite as bad as the way I'm describing it, but the implication is very clear that the more control people have, the greater their well-being. And so if that's the case, then what we should be doing is giving people clear goals. And by clear goals, it's like, this is what I expect from you. This is when I'm going to review you. This is what your deliverables look like. So like clear is the operant word, right? Um, and this is the piece that I think is the hardest for people, is this idea that you're going to have to learn to trust people. So
yep.
if you tell people what the job is and you train them intensively, and in your heart of hearts, they can do the job, then let them do the job. Right? Let them do the job, and let them go to their colleagues if they need help. And which is another part of the book, right? Which is having teammates that will help you and are motivated to help you. But this is a really big thing, because if you can give people flexibility on how work gets done, and even to the extent of when it gets done, can you give people remote? Can you allow people to come in later if they've got a child that they want to take to school? Giving them that kind of control enables well-being in a really, really serious. Obviously, the guy was knighted for what I'm sharing with you. So it's important data, it's important information. And then the other piece of this is that you have to meet with people weekly and see how they're doing. Check in with them. So it's not like you're giving people full autonomy and you give them a goal and you go, by the end of the month, I need you to get this. And then you bring them in at the end of the month and they go, how'd you do? Well, I didn't get it done. Well, now I'm in trouble as a leader. So that's silly, right? I'm not going to take that risk. I want to give people freedom and autonomy, but I also need to do my job. So if you guys work for me, I'm going to schedule weekly calls, and I'm going to start off by just asking how you're doing as a human being, because that's not only just the theme of your podcast, but that's the thing to do. Like, I don't want to talk about work yet. Just tell me how you're doing. And then go, hey, quick update. How you doing on the project? You need any help? Anything I can do to help you? Are we tracking? That kind of a thing. And put all that together, and you can give people freedom.
You've touched on so many important points, Mark. I feel like we could have a sort of a conversation that lasts for days, because there's so much to unpack there in terms of, the trust aspect, leading from the heart, putting the human at the center of things, and that kind of balance between sort of freedom and flexibility, but also feeling supported, and like that people have the access to the resources and insights that they need to be able to do their job well. It's a really powerful and very practical approach that leaders can take and implement right now. Now, it also segues, I think, nicely into our final question, which is around your final tip. And this really resonated for us. And it doesn't surprise us, of course, because of your work in leading from the heart. And the tip is to care about and even love your people. We're super curious to hear from you. Why does love matter at work? And if you can, to sort of finish us off, share an example with where you've seen the impact of love in the workplace.
So, it's a very big question, and I'm like, there's a lot of ways that I could answer this, but I'll start off by saying that I grew up. My mom died when I was very young, and my father raised me. And for whatever reason, he was a very successful person, but he was not a successful father. And he went out of his way to really cripple me in my self esteem, self belief. He belittled me. And this is where the sarcasm came from. But he was really direct about it. There was no ambiguity about his belief and his assessment of me, that I would never amount to anything. And so I grew up with that. Right. And then he kicked me out of the house right as I graduated from high school with no money and no support. And so I had a very difficult life up until the time I graduated from college. And I started managing people. And I think I realized at that point that I was at a tremendous disadvantage compared to people that I was graduating from college with, that they had places to go home on the holidays, and they had people checking in, and how was your class, and what did you get on your paper, and how well did the exam go? And oh, it didn't go well. That's okay. You're smart. You're going to rebound. Don't worry. Like, I didn't have any of that. I didn't have anybody make me feel safe. I felt very vulnerable for a very long time. And so as I started to manage people, I unconsciously gave people everything that I always wanted, all the support that I never got. And I did it unconsciously for a very long time, like the first 15 years of my career, before somebody pointed out to me that I managed people very, very differently. And I realized, oh my God, like, I did this in response to this upbringing that I had. But the reason that I never really looked at it was because I got phenomenal results from people, and I kept getting promoted, like promoted in ways like I described to you, where I'm like, do they know what they're doing? Like, are they seeing something that I'm not seeing? Because I think you're crazy to be giving me these jobs. But I always did well in them. And the reason I did well in them was because I cared deeply about my people. I made them feel safe. They never had any question of how they stood with me. They were doing great. I didn't have any problem telling them, I love that you're working here. I'm so glad I hired you. You're the best hire I've ever made. Like, whatever. You're a phenomenal employee. We think people get soft around the middle, and, they'll take advantage of you. And that just simply wasn't my experience. So fast forward the clincher here. So really, what I did was I loved people, right? I mean, that's what people were feeling. And every human being on the planet needs it, even though, we think, oh, we don't need that shit at work. Like, keep that out of there. Like, we don't need to worry about that. Like, they get it from their spouse or their children, but they ain't getting it from me. Like, I'm not worried about that. Well, what I demonstrated, and the whole premise of the first book, Lead from the Heart, which is, if you care about people, they feel it and they will reciprocate. And that's what you want. You want people to commit to them. So I write for Fast Company magazine, and I was doing I was talking to a woman named Barbara Fredrickson, and she is a star, one of the star positive psychology. She's actually a psychology professor at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I was talking to her about something entirely different that was massively validating for my thesis. Like, oh my God, like I'm like, this validation is like everything I always wanted, always knew was true, but now I'm getting it from somebody who's researched it. So I could have ended it there. And I got greedy. And I just said, hey, before we go, is there any other thing stunning thing that you have to tell me that will blow my mind? And so the original thing that she told me was that human beings thrive on positive emotions, which is what I learned. I'm appreciating people, telling them how much I value them, growing them, teaching them, demonstrating that I'm making, that I think about them, that I want the best for them. People could feel that, right? So I did that. So I was giving people a high ratio of positive emotions. And what she was saying to me was, guess what? You, we human beings are hardwired to thrive on positive emotions. So what you were doing was brilliant, whether you realized it or not. Like you're setting people up for the best possible performance, which is why every team you ever had was phenomenal. Every team you ever had got you promoted, right? And so I'm like, wow, like this is mind blowing. So now I go to the greedy question, and she goes, okay, I got one for you. She goes, when we think about positive emotions, so you think about positive emotions like interest, appreciation, joy, awe, love, right? There's a whole list of them, but that's some of them, right? So she said, what we have found, and what by we, she meant her research. See, what we found is that any positive emotion is an experience of love. Awe is love, joy is love, interest is love, appreciation is love. Whether we digest that, internalize it or not. When we're seeing a beautiful sunset, or we're at Yosemite, or somebody says to us, I just need you to know how valued you are here and what a contribution you make, that's an expression of love. She didn't say you got to go up to people and go, I love you, Sally. I love you, Alexis. I love you, Sally. I love you, Alexis. It's you just demonstrate it to them by giving them the experience of positive emotions. So for 7 years, I've ended every single one of my podcasts saying, love your people. And it's not like, I love you, man. It's not insincere. And it's not the come here, I got to give you a hug kind of a thing because I love you. It's just show them. So it's much more subtle than it is just saying to people, I love you.
So powerful, Mark. I think that's such a beautiful way for us to also round out our conversation with you. There's so many different ways that we can express it. And I think often people have this idea that love doesn't belong at work, but I think really love belongs everywhere that humans are. So we thank you so much for sharing your time, your wisdom, your love with us today at We Are Human Leaders. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. It's a lovely time. Wonderful time. Nice meeting you both, Sally and Alexis.
As human leaders, we're seeking to lead better, live truer, and be the change we want to see in the world, because that's how we recreate workplaces and the world into a place where people flourish and thrive. We are all human first and leader second. To learn more about today's guest, find all the details in our show notes at www.wearehumanleaders.com. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next time.